Hey guys, it's Crystal. I hope you guys are all doing well and that you've had a good week so far. It's like pouring down rain here, so I guess I don't have much to mention about the weather today. But hopefully you guys have had a good week. If you're new to this channel, like I said, my name is Crystal. I do Canadian true crime or true crime with a Canadian twist from time to time. I also do international crimes. This month I've done them for Shocktober, right, for our Halloween stories. But I do them because they're interesting to me. They've been recommended by other people, or sometimes to show the difference in the criminal system. You'll see a big difference today, trust me. So hopefully, if that's something that sounds good to you guys and you want to be a part of, you will hit that old like button. You'll subscribe if you haven't already. You'll hit the notification bell. That might work, might not. You'll share, and hopefully you'll leave me some comments. You guys know I always say it, particularly about this case. You guys may have some questions. You'll probably be outraged. Trust me, I was too. And I did try to do like a slight weird Halloween version of Harley Quinn today. I've been trying for the last little bit to do some more Halloweenish looks. So hopefully you guys get what I'm talking about. And if you guys are returning subscribers, you guys already know how much I love you and how thankful I am that you guys choose to watch my sometimes rambling videos. So thank you so much for being here. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you guys. And this week is also actually a big week for me. It marks my 1-year anniversary on YouTube. So yes. Well, my 1-year anniversary for these type of videos. I'm sure you guys have seen some of the others. If you guys do choose to leave a comment though, please, no hate. There's enough hate out there in the world as there is. We're just here to talk about things. Like I say in most of my videos, your theories and my theories might be different, and I'm always interested in hearing other takes that I maybe didn't think of before. So hopefully you guys will leave me some comments and let me know what you think about this case. These videos are for educational or entertainment purposes only. You guys know I have to make YouTube happy. So we have been doing Shocktober and we finally got over Fred and Rose West. I'm so sorry guys. It ended up being one video longer than I wanted it to be. So a couple of our videos we may have to save until December because you guys already know that in November I'm doing some of the requests and hopefully updating some news as well. I'm just waiting for the end of the Greg Furuta trial. If you guys do want to follow that though, there are articles on it as well. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the most shocking crimes, if not the most shocking crime I've ever heard of. There is only one victim in this case, but the things done to this victim are so atrocious. They're going to make your skin crawl, and you guys will probably see it in my face. If you are triggered by things like torture, I know we talked about it with the Wests, but this is even more hardcore, guys. If you guys are affected by things like that, sexual assaults, things like that, this may not be the video for you. This might be one to skip, but it is an important case and it should be talked about. I didn't find out about this case until 3 or 4 years ago, and when I read it, I immediately had to send it to one of my other really good friends who also likes true crime, and even she was horrified by it. And you guys know I'm pretty hardcore. I've read a lot of things. We did Ted Bundy, we did the Wests, we did Paul and Carla. If I could stomach that, you would think, but oh my God, the stuff done to this girl. So like I said, trigger warnings for sure on this video. Today we are going to be talking about the case of Junco Furuta. I don't know if a lot of other YouTubers have talked about this. I know of one in particular. If you haven't heard of this case, I wouldn't be surprised. If you have, I'm also not surprised, but it is very graphic. So let's get right into it. So Junco Furuta was actually born January 18th of 1971. She would have been 50 years old this year. I'm going to try to say it right, guys, because this is a case from Japan. So hopefully I am not butchering anything. She was born in Misato, Saitama Prefecture in Japan. A prefecture, from what I gather, is like an arrondissement in France, right? It seems to be a region or a municipality. So Misato is a city within this district or this municipality, kind of like what we have down here. Like I come from Dresden, but that's in the Chatham-Kent municipality. So it seems to be kind of like that. So it is a city in this region. And in 2021, it had a population of about 142,835 people. So it's fairly large. There's enough people that live there. Satayama Prefecture is actually known for its bonsai trees. Apparently they grow a lot there and they're very beautiful. Of course, it's very scenic. It's also landlocked. There isn't any water surrounding it. It's kind of unusual in Japan for that to happen, so it has a meaning for that as well. It's also known for the historic castle town of, oh God, Kawagoe. There's a railway museum there that it's well known for. And it's also well known for its sake, I guess. Really good quality sake comes from that area too. There's also a famous zoo from Satayama, and it's called the Tobu Zoo. It's well known for things of that nature. So Junko lived in Misato with her parents, her older brother, and her younger brother. She was right in the middle. And from as far as I know, they'd lived there all of Junko's life. She was a high school student at this time. This is 1988 that we're talking about, and she was 17 years old. Some reports will say she's 16. It doesn't make sense if you do the math, so I'm going to say for sure she's 17 years old. She was attending the, oh God, Yashio Minami High School in the Satayama Prefecture. She was going to school there, and she was a very ambitious young girl. Junko Furuta was not just beautiful, and I will show you some pictures. She was very popular with her peers. She was a nice girl. She was kind. She was described as very obedient, studious, quiet, and very responsible. But she was very popular. People liked her. She had a great personality, and she was just a genuinely nice person. Junko did not smoke, she didn't drink, she didn't party, she didn't do any drugs. A lot of her classmates did, but it wasn't Junko. Now, it doesn't seem like they shamed her or anything like that. They knew that she was very focused on school. She had definite goals, and she always got high grades. She was rarely absent from school, guys. Rarely. And that would be in her whole high school career. Very rarely was she ever absent from school. She also had a part-time job working at a plastics molding factory after school. This was also different from a lot of her classmates because she took things very seriously. The reason why she was working at this job, or one of the reasons, was because she was saving up for a grad trip she wanted to go on, which would be later in 1989 when she graduated. She was in her senior year, ostensibly, of school at this point in time. And everybody just remembers what a great person she was. She wasn't necessarily shy, but like I said, she was quiet and studious. She was very focused on her work. In fact, Junko had already lined up a job for after graduation. It was a job she was to start after graduation in an electronics store. So like I said, she was very focused on her goals, very focused on her future, and she was the kind of child a parent dreamed of. You know what I mean? She really was. She was almost, you could almost say she was the epitome of a good girl. So on November 25th of 1988, Junko was actually biking home from her part-time job at the plastics factory when a teenage boy that she didn't know came up and kicked her off her bike. Just kicked her off her bike. Of course, she fell off her bike, and then the kid ran away. Another young man approached her, said he had seen the whole thing and that he was very concerned for her, so he offered to walk her home. Junko agreed to this, but of course Junko is going to pay for this mistake with her life. Now, some articles you'll read, and they're actually limited. It's only a few. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to check if that one piece of hair is out there so you can see. They're very limited, these ones, but there are some articles floating around out there that said that Junko didn't know this boy. She did, actually. This guy's name was, oh God, Hiroshi Miyano. And Hiroshi Miyano was 18 at this point in time, but he was a schoolmate of Junko's. They had gone to school together, so she definitely knew who he was. In fact, fairly recently, he had asked her out. She had politely declined because she was far too busy with her schoolwork and her part-time job. She just didn't have the time to go. So she politely declined. That too was a mistake, but she didn't know that at the time. So they were classmates and he'd had a crush on her, and she definitely said that yes, he could walk her home. Another thing to know about Junko is that she, kind of like Lucy Partington when we talked about the Fred West murders, right? The Fred and Rose West murders, how Lucy would have never gone with a stranger. Junko was the same way. She would have never gone anywhere with somebody she didn't know, but she knew this boy, so she went with him. What Junko didn't know is that Miyano was not just the school bully. That's how they described him. The school bully, not a school bully, the school bully. But he was also in the Yakuza. He was an associate, also known as a Chinpura, because he was on the lower level of the Yakuza, and he used that to gain notoriety and to get people to do things for him. We're going to talk about the Yakuza in a few minutes, but that's what he would do. No one ever said no to Hiroshi Miyamo because, like I said, he would either bully you or he would use his links to the Yakuza to get people to do what he wanted. When Junko turned him down, he was beyond upset. Nobody rejected him. Nobody at all. Now, Junko didn't know about his Yakuza ties, as far as I know. I don't even think she knew he was the bully. They would probably have been in the same year, maybe not in the same classes, but they did know each other. So maybe she didn't see that side of him. I don't know for sure, but she did not, as far as I know that he was part of the Yakuza. If she had, she wouldn't have gone with him. But like I said, he was very angry about this rejection. Nobody rejected him. So he formed a plan to get revenge on Junko. He and another one of his associates, 16-year-old Shinji Minato. I know it's going to get really hard, guys, because one of the guys' names is Mignano and one of them, sorry guys, is Minato. Sorry. We're friends. Now, Shinji was also a violent member of the Yakuza. He was also a Chinpura in the Yakuza. And most of their friends and associates were too. So he recruited him to help with this plan. It was actually Minato who went and kicked Junko off her bike, but she didn't know Minato. He was 16, so he was younger than her. She didn't know him. So he recruited him to go up and harass Junko and get her in a position, if you will, to accept his help. And that's what happened on that night. So, like I said, in order to understand what happened, we have to talk a little bit about the Yakuza. I didn't know an awful lot about the Yakuza. I did know that they were a very organized criminal system. I did know that they usually dressed in business suits, things of that nature. What I knew from Kill Bill or other movies that show the Yakuza. I didn't know much about them. But the Yakuza is a multi-level system. It is formed in a triangular shape, guys. So you would have the lead boss up on the top, and then his underlings, and then theirs, and so on and so forth, until you hit the Chinpura. Chinpura are generally recruited from high school, especially if they're prone to violence or they show thug-like behavior, street thug behavior, or if they're involved in other gang-related behavior. The Yakuza will recruit them. Some of their recruits are actually from middle school. And Yakuza can be anybody. Most of them come from poverty, but some of them are business people, legitimate business people that you wouldn't realize were Yakuza. So Yakuza do have their fingers in both the illegitimate world and the legitimate world. They usually recruit, like I say, very young males, and these males are considered to be quite rude or very rude. That's what it said. As long as the people show rude, probably violent behavior, they're recruited. They need that. They need the enforcement. So the Yakuza members are actually not just one crime syndicate. They're many crime syndicates that come together to loosely form what we know of the Yakuza. And they do follow certain rituals and certain practices that would band them together. But they're not just one crime organization, they're different syndicates. Um, in Japan, they're also known as the Gokodo, which basically means, quote, the extreme path, end quote. They're also known to the police and the media as Boryokudan. Sorry, guys, I'm sorry. Which means, quote, violent groups, plural, not just one violent group. So they're well known in Japan, guys. You know it. Yakuza tend to think of themselves as Ninkayo Dante, aka, quote, a chivalrous organizations, end quote, because these are loosely, the Yakuza has been around since about the 1600s, and these rituals and ideals are loosely based around the chivalrous rituals and aspects of Christian knighthood. Actually, they're loosely based around that. But in English, Ninkayo Dante actually means, sorry guys, I'm so sorry, gangster. So according to the Yakuza, they're chivalrous and they follow a chivalrous code of conduct, and they do actually follow a very ritualized and a very strict set of rules. They do follow a strict set of code. So usually Yakuza are almost exclusively male, particularly the bosses, but they have on occasion, very, very few times, been headed by a woman as an acting boss, as long as she was the wife of the past boss, if that makes sense. But they're almost exclusively male. They do dress in business suits, and they do usually have their hair slicked back. Now, they wear the business suits to hide tattoos. Yakuza members have many, many tattoos. That is part of their ritualization. That is one of the things they do. Sometimes they actually have full body tattoos, not on their face, but they can on their neck all the way down. And wearing the business suit helps hide it. So it makes a Yakuza member less recognizable, if you will. So at one point in the 60s, the Yakuza actually boasted about 200,000 members. That was at their peak of popularity, if you will, but it has since kind of declined quite a bit. There were only about 25,900 about 25,900 members as of now. And they actually have factions not just in Japan, but they've branched out and have a few members in South Korea and a few members in the United States, guys. Particularly California, Hawaii, and the southwestern states. Yakuza are also found to be there. Now, they're usually involved, like I said before, in illegal matters, guys. We know this for sure. But they do have legal business covers as well. And they do some charity work, kind of like the Hells Angels, guys, where you know they're definitely involved in criminal aspects. But the Hells Angels are really big on children. I don't know if you guys knew this or not. I did, because they used to have the charity ride. I don't know if they're still able to do that because of COVID, to collect money for children's hospitals. And they also used to do like a form of Toys for Tots as well. The Hells Angels will do that. Yakuza members were particularly known to help out during the 2011 tsunami, donating goods and helping distribute them. So they do, I guess, do some good. Due to changing opportunities in the job market, new legal wranglings that more recently, when I say recently, it's like the past 20 years, have come out, and different social developments since the 1960s, there's more opportunity for youths to further themselves, so they don't feel the need to join or to be recruited into the Yakuza as much as they did before. Now, like I said, a lot of Yakuza members come from poverty, right? They're trying to better themselves. They're trying to make money quickly And what better way to do it than join an illegal organization? So they are doing that. But some of the members do come from wealthier families. They want that notoriety, right? And that respect. And some of the members do become legitimate business people, like I said before. They usually start as chimpura and then work their way up. And they normally cut ties, not all of them, but normally cut ties with their own family. They don't need that family organizational group, particularly if their family life wasn't that great anymore. I guess it would be easier for them to. It's a lot like street gangs here, where you're no longer affiliated with your family too much. Your loyalty is to the gang. So your loyalty is to the Yakuza, but not actually the Yakuza. It's your loyalty is to the boss or bosses. Many Yakuzas used to be missing, or some of the older ones now, their left, oh God, that's my right hand. Sorry guys. Their left pinky fingertip. So this area right here. Maybe even a little smaller, maybe just this area right here. Many of them were usually missing them. Easy way to identify you as Yakuza, right, is that you're missing the tip of your left pinky finger. The reason this is done is part of a ritual. It's actually a way to ask for apology or offer penance for something you've done to the boss, for some way you've angered the boss or displeased him. In order to apologize or make amends for it, they used to cut off your left pinky fingertip. They don't do that as much now because they realized how easy it was for the police to identify them as Yakuza because of that, and they didn't want that, right? Because then they're going to get arrested. So they don't do that practice as much now, let's just say. And like I've mentioned before, the Yakuza are definitely not just a single organization. They're actually many different syndicates that have come together. Think of it as a mafia-esque style organization. So usually you have the head of the mafia, right? And then his underboss, so on, so forth. You have certain enforcements. It's loosely based like that as well, but usually in a triangular shape where there's always somebody above you unless you're the actual boss. And then you owe your loyalty to the boss and you do what he says. So they actually come together to form the world's largest organized crime syndicate. So it's one of the world's largest ones, guys. It is the world's largest organized crime syndicate. There are three main groups. There are also smaller groups, but there are three main groups that most people talk about, guys. And the first one is the Yamaguchi Gumi, and that's the largest Yakuza family. About 30% of all their members in Japan are part of this family. So it's the largest of all, and it's actually the basis for the Yakuza that we see in movies. Movies like Kill Bill. Remember when Lucy Liu was the head of the Yakuza? Which usually doesn't happen. But you also remember the slick back hair, the crazy eights, and that they were wearing the suits. That's like a Yakuza. And that this system is what we normally associate with the Yakuza. They're based on that. So the second largest group is the Sumiyoshi Kai. They're direct rivals with the Yamaguchi Gumi, and their chain of command is actually more relaxed than the Yamaguchi Gumi, because the Yamaguchi Gumi definitely forms that triangular basis. So do most other families. But in the case of the Sumiyoshi Kai, it's a little bit more relaxed, and there could be more than one boss you follow. There might be two or three, but you still show loyalty to that boss. The third largest group is the Inagawa Kai. And they were basically the first family to expand out of Japan, to expand the organization out of Japan. So the Yakuza, of course, control the drug trade, particularly methamphetamines, I guess, are really big. for them. Some members are also involved in human trafficking. A lot of them are involved in extortion, right? Offering protection for businesses, particularly smaller businesses, in exchange for money or goods. They'll go up and intimidate another business into closing or leaving, etc. I don't know if they still do this, but you know, they used to have like a certain symbol or a card you'd put in your front window so people would know you were protected by the Yakuza. Some Yakuza are also actually involved in banking and real estate too. So there you go. They infiltrate a lot of different things. So that's the Yakuza, guys. So after Junko agreed to walk home with Miyano, he ended up taking her to a nearby warehouse. And he raped her there. And he basically told her he was Yakuza and she'd better do what he said or he would kill her. He then took her to a local hotel and raped her again. From this hotel, he phoned Minato, who happened to be with two of their other Yakuza friends. So 17-year-old Joe Ogura and 17-year-old, sorry guys, just give me 1 second, Yasuji Wantanabe. They were also with Minato at this point in time. Anyways, he phoned them and said, he bragged about what he had done. He's like, yeah, I've got her here. Yeah, I raped her. It was actually Joe Ogura that said, you know what we should do? We should hold her captive for a while so we can all enjoy her, and so can some of our friends. And of course, Miyano was okay with this. He thought this was a good idea. Minato and Miyano. Sorry guys, they're very close together. So these four guys together, boys, we're going to call them boys. They're not really, but like, look at their ages, guys. 16, two 17-year-olds and an 18-year-old. So boys, but I use that term loosely. Loved a good gang rape. They had committed at least one before. It's going to be a little bit different from Junko's, and they would go on to do more. Where they didn't actually hold that person captive. They just raped her and let her go. But they more than likely threatened her with the fact that they were part of the Yakuza. So these guys loved a good gang rape. And of course, they were more than excited over the fact that they now had this girl captive to play with. So they agreed to meet Miyano and Junko, his captive, in a local park. And they did so. And as soon as Junko saw Minato, she knew she'd been set up. She knew that the whole thing had been orchestrated by Miyano to kidnap her and rape her. She knew it. So at this point in time, of course, Junko had her backpack with her, right? Because she had gone from school to work. The boys actually went through her backpack and were able to locate her address written on one of the books in her backpack. So they started threatening her family. They basically told her if she didn't comply with everything they said, they would send the Yakuza to go and kill her family. So of course, Junko's very afraid at this point in time. She knows what the Yakuza are. Most people in Japan, even though they have a smaller membership number, most people in Japan are still highly afraid of the Yakuza guys. They're very afraid. And at this point in time in 1988, they were definitely afraid of them. So Junko was then taken to a home in the Ayazi district, in the Ayazi district of Adachi, which is in Tokyo. It's about 16 minutes from Misato, guys. It's about 16 minutes from where Junko was. So not super far, but far enough away. No one would have known, right? And this was at night. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning when Miyano... sorry guys, I hope I'm not switching names around. When Miyano actually called up his 3 friends, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. So they probably met at the park at 4 in the morning on the 26th. of November. They took her to this home, and this home was Minato's home. It's going to get a little bit difficult, guys, because I'm not 100% certain if he lived there on his own or not. We're going to get into that. He is only 16, but I'm not 100% certain. Anyway, they took her to this home that was owned by Minato's parents, and this home would become their clubhouse of sorts at this point in time. On November 27th, then they all raped Junko again because they love a good gang rape. On November 27th, Junko's parents, of course, became very concerned. They hadn't seen their daughter since the 25th. So they contacted the police and said that they hadn't seen their daughter. She'd never done anything like this before. She was always happy at home. She was studious. She was responsible. She was very respectful and obedient towards her parents. So it was pretty confusing for the Furutas at this point in time. However, the boys must have sensed something was going on. Probably because they knew that she was what we know of as a good girl, not someone prone to running away or leaving home or anything like that. So they actually forced Junko to call her parents. They forced her to say that she had run away, that she was staying with friends, and that she was safe. She also told them not to worry. She was forced to say all these things to her parents. So even though her parents were really confused based on her prior behaviors and the fact that she had never done this before, they accepted the explanation because it came from Junko herself and she didn't lie. So they accepted it, and they must have phoned the police and said, okay, we've heard from her. She's safe. Now, Minato's parents, oddly enough, were occasionally at the home. Reports said occasionally. I don't know if it's because they lived in another home and let their 16-year-old son have his own place. It seems like they have more than one home anyway, guys. Or if it's that they worked a lot and they were only there occasionally. I'm not quite certain, but they were there. I'm pointing this out to you guys. The Minato parents were in the home. At the start, the four boys forced Junko to tell the parents that she was Minato's girlfriend. And I guess at the start it made sense to them because she was there all the time. However, eventually, she started to look really bad, and it was due to the torture that we're going to get into. Number one, she started to smell from lack of showering and things of that nature, and she was always at the house. So Minato's parents actually began to suspect that something more was up, especially since Junko repeatedly asked them for help. They refused. They just basically ignored her presence, guys. I'm not even joking. They would later go on to say in court that they did this because their son had grown increasingly violent towards them in the past few years, and because they were afraid of him because they knew he was part of the Yakuza. He must have used that on them. This is the reason they gave for not helping this girl. They feared a reprisal from the Yakuza and from their own son. Junko was actually kept a total of 44 days, guys. And during that time, she was tortured in ways that most of us won't even think about. She was repeatedly raped. We've said this before, and it would be both front and back. If you get my meaning, guys, I'm sure you do. She was repeatedly raped. And it wasn't just by the four boys. It was by their known Yakuza associates and I think a couple other people that they knew. Not everyone that raped Junko at this point in time was a Yakuza. Most of them were. And reports say that it was at least 100 Yakuza and probably associates, but not actual parts of the Yakuza members themselves. Maybe people from other street gangs, guys. These were people, known criminals, let's just say. So up to 100 times. And reports also say that in those 44 days, Junko was raped between 400 and 500 times in 44 days. I'm just pointing this out. At one point in time, she was raped 12 times in one day, guys. Now, according to the 4 boys, this is according to the boys, they shaved her pubic hair. She was kept mostly naked. I guess maybe when his parents were around, Minato's parents were around, she was probably allowed to wear a few articles of clothing. She was also forced to sleep outside with little on, if not naked, in December, guys, in Japan. So yeah, it's very cold. She was forced to sleep outside on a balcony. They sometimes, okay, we're going to get into it. Sorry, guys, just give me 1 minute. She was forced to dance naked for them and masturbate in front of them in order to turn them on. She was like forced to dance to music and stuff like that. They would insert various objects into her orifices, her genitalia, if you will, guys, which included things like a hot lit light bulb that they then moved around inside her until it shattered, chicken skewers, lit matches. At one point in time, they inserted a lit firecracker into her anus and watched it explode, which of course you guys know would have resulted in terrible burns. And she would have also had burns to her vagina from not just the exploding light bulb, but also the lit matches and the fact that they burned her with cigarettes and lighter fluid there as well. They would also insert metal rods into her and bottles, things of that nature. She didn't smoke. Like I said, remember, she didn't smoke, drink, take drugs, nothing like that. So they forced her to smoke multiple cigarettes at once. They also forced her to sniff paint thinner, and she was forced to drink quantities of alcohol. They didn't feed her very much, guys, but they did force her to drink quantities of milk and water. I'm not sure why, they just did. So she was also forced to drink quantities of milk and water. Now, you guys know if you drink too much water, you may have heard of cases of this. I definitely have. You can actually ruin your electrolytes and drown yourself, or you can cause somebody to drown that way too. So that could have been a reasoning behind it. They smashed her fingers completely. Sorry, guys. So that she could no longer move them. She now had useless hands. This took several days, but they smashed her fingers with weights and things of that nature. After about 20 days into Junko's ordeal, so around the 20-day mark, she could no longer walk because at the 20-day mark, she was able to get a hold of a phone and she called police. However, before she could get a word out, one of the boys noticed, snatched the phone away and hung it up. Of course, the police did call back, and it was Miyano himself that said, oh no, it's been a mistake. Nothing happened here. And of course, as punishment for that, they doused her legs and arms with lighter fluid and lit her on fire. Now, she was able to survive this. She was able to put it out, but of course, there was no medical attention for her severe burns. That was punishment. So at this point in time, guys, she can't walk anymore. It was said at this point in time that it took her literally an hour to crawl from Minato's bedroom upstairs to the bathroom downstairs. So at this point in time, she's literally confined to Minato's bedroom. They also jumped on her head numerous times, would smash her face into a concrete floor, beat her with a golf club, bamboo sticks. I've heard about this as a form of torture, guys, where they beat somebody's feet with bamboo sticks. They did that to her. They suspended her from the ceiling and used her as a punching bag. Of course, she's bleeding heavily at this point in time. They forced her to drink urine and eat cockroaches. At around this point in time, she was having trouble keeping anything down. Reports said about 30 days in for sure, she was very much having trouble keeping anything down, food or drink. As soon as it would go down her throat, she would immediately throw it up due to all the internal damage in her. And this would anger the boys even more. They tried to make her clean it up with her useless hands. And of course, she wasn't really able to. And as such, they would beat her further because of this. At one point in time, they also burned the bottoms of her feet with lighter fluid as well. So that's twice as of now that they've burned her. They would also tie her hands and feet and drop an iron weight repeatedly on her stomach as well. They urinated on her. They also inserted scissors. Sorry, guys. And roasting needles into her vagina. They pierced both of her breasts with needles, and they basically ripped off her left nipple with a pair of pliers. She was kept in a freezer for hours at a time, like naked, guys, and then, let out to warm up and to be tortured and raped again. She had her eyelids, guys, burned with hot wax and lighters. Her face was so severely beaten that she was no longer recognizable. Like, you would think the Minato parents at this point in time would be like, yeah, we better get her help. But no, they completely ignored this. So did Minato's brother, who also resided at the home. Sorry. It's a lot. So, the burns to her legs, like I said, were never treated. And as such, they started to become infected. I mean, you could imagine that. And when something gets infected and it's not treated, it gives off the smell of rot. So, 30 days, 20, 25, 30 days in, Junko was no longer sexually appealing to these boys. First of all, her body is just beaten. Second of all, she wasn't allowed to bathe or shower, so I'm sure she's filthy and smells from that. She's been repeatedly raped. She's been bleeding heavily, guys. Like, I mean, out of her mouth, out of all of her orifices. Plus, she has burns to her arms, her legs, but it was her legs that were really extensively burned, guys. Burns to her genitals, burns to the bottom of her feet. These sores are untreated, so definitely they're going to smell and rot, and she's swollen, she's disfigured, things of this nature. So at this point in time, she becomes sexually unattractive, let's just say, to the boys. So instead of raping her, they're now just focusing on abusing her. She started at this point in time to beg them to kill her. In fact, the torture was so extensive that her eardrums were damaged and her brain actually shrank in size when they were able to autopsy it. Her brain had shrank in size, guys. So at some point in time, I'm not actually sure when, in the 44 days, a different boy, he was not one of the four that we've spoken about. He was not, somebody, he may have been part of the Yakuza, he may have been an associate, but he was not somebody that frequented the house. It seems like he was only there the one time. Depending on accounts, one account says that the boy raped Junko while he was there and was overcome by guilt or grief because of it. Other reports say that he was just at the home for some reason. He probably knew people there and saw the state Junko was in at this point in time and was horrified about it. But regardless, either this boy had developed a conscience, unlike the rest, or this boy was so put off and shocked at the way Junko looked. He actually told his brother what had happened. His brother then told the parents, his parents, and the parents did the right thing and phoned the police. It doesn't appear like they were afraid of the consequences or the Yakuza. It doesn't look like they cared. They just wanted to help this girl. Now, there is another article that said that the boy was the one that told his parents. But regardless, this set of parents did call the police. And the police went to the Minato home. Mr. and Mrs. Minato answered the door and acted completely shocked. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, this is how far they carried it. Acted completely shocked, told the police there was no such girl there. There was no girl there at all. Nobody was being held captive. It was outrageous. And they then invited the police to come in and look for themselves, just to be certain. Police figured that the parents must be telling the truth because A, this is an older couple, and B, who invites the police in if they've committed a crime and the evidence is there? So instead of going in and taking the parents up on their advice and looking around, the police just left. They didn't investigate any further. So Junko's been reported missing by her parents, but then her parents called and took it back. They have one phone call to 911 or the police from the Minato residence that they were then told was a mistake. And they've had a report of a girl being held captive at the Minato residence. And still, they didn't feel the need to look around. Regardless. Sometime in December, later December, after Junko was no longer physically attracted to them or sexually enticing to them, the boys went out and gang raped a 19-year-old girl who was also on her way home from work. They didn't hold her captive, though. They actually let her go. I'm assuming this is already because they have Junko at their disposal to maim even more. On January 4th of 1989, the boys challenged Junko to a game of Mahjong. Do you guys remember Mahjong? Mahjong? I think it might be that way. Mahjong was, it used to be on the computers. It was like old school. It was a game of tiles where you had to match them up, but they were like built up on each other. They challenged her to a card game of Mahjong. And unfortunately for Junko, she won. Now, some reports will say that Miyano had played Mahjong with somebody and he was upset they won, so he took it out on Junko. It was actually Junko that won the game. So they decided that as a reward for winning, they were going to beat her even more. They were going to take out all their rage on her. As punishment, they doused her arms, her breasts, her stomach, her thighs, and her legs with lighter fluid again and set her on fire. Junko did try to put it out. It would appear at this point in time that she's either semi-conscious or going in and out of consciousness, guys. It would appear at this point in time. And she did convulse somewhat too. Not to be deterred, this was the point in time where they actually took the iron weights and dropped them on her stomach repeatedly. This was also another assault where they beat the bottom of her feet with bamboo sticks as well. So at this point in time, you can definitely tell Junko's body is going into shock. I mean, it's been 44 days and she's put up with the tortures and then some that I described, guys. 44 days. So at one point in time, one of the boys kicked her into a stereo system that was in, I guess, Minato's room or wherever they were doing this. And she fell into it and then slid down onto the floor and started convulsing again. And at this point in time, I guess the boys decided to leave her alone and they left the house for a little while. Junko, of course, during this time was left on her own, bleeding. She's bleeding from everywhere, guys. And dying. She was left there to die on her own, and her body finally gave into the shock. This is not the first time that I've heard of a torture case like this. There are two others I know of. One involving a girl named Sylvia Likens, or Lickens. I call her Sylvia Likens. Other people say it different. And another one involving a man. He was actually a special needs man from Texas. Sylvia, I believe, was in Illinois, possibly Indiana. Sorry, guys, don't quote me on that. It's been a while since I've read about her, but there is a book based on her. They were also tortured in unimaginable ways for very long periods of time, but not to the extent, in my opinion, that Junko was. So it's not an isolated case, but just in the case, both Buddy's and Sylvia's, there were also young people involved, let's just say, with doing this at someone's behest. So after, like I said, after the 44 days, she finally succumbed to her injuries. Now, later that night, Minato's brother was somehow able to get a hold of him. I don't know if he called him. It's 1988. I don't really think, well, maybe they did have cell phones being part of the Yakuza. It doesn't matter. The brother was able to get a hold of him and told them that he thought Junko was dead. Of course, the boys thought that Junko was faking. They seriously thought she was faking. In fact, prior times, when she would collapse from the abuse, they thought she was faking. So they had to go home and see for themselves. And of course, Junko really was dead. At this point in time, they were afraid. Okay, I guess according to them, it's okay to rape and hurt people, but they were afraid of having a murder rap over their heads. You would think they'd be like okay with it because of street cred or whatever, but no, I guess apparently they panicked. So they wrapped Junko's body up in some blankets and they shoved her into a 55-gallon drum, and then they poured concrete over her. At about 8:00 p.m. that night, they loaded the drum into a vehicle and disposed of it in a cement truck in Koto, Tokyo, which is about 46 to 54 minutes away from the Ayazi prefecture. And they thought they'd gotten away with it. No one knew Junko was with them. Well, their associates knew, but they were Yakuza. The police had come, but the parents had lied. No one knew that the phone call from the house had originally come from Junko. And at this point in time, even though her parents are very suspicious of where she is, they received a phone call from her saying that she was okay. So they may have had their suspicions, and they were probably very concerned over the fact that they hadn't heard from her in the other 42 days. But nobody is able to link up Junko to these boys, ostensibly. So it does seem like they've gotten away with it. However, on January 23rd of 1989, Miyano and Ogura were actually both arrested for the gang rape on the 19-year-old in December. On January 29th, now I guess they were arrested, but they must have been released on bail or something like that, because it wasn't until January 29th that they were interrogated by police. The police had actually gone through their houses and found women's panties there, so they became suspicious. They know that there's been gang rapes too, so they became suspicious. And these girls can technically describe the people, although I'm sure they were threatened, so they probably just said they were young men. Anyway, they went through the houses, found some women's underwear, and they decided to interrogate them about another murder, a different murder, not Junko's murder. At this point in time, of course, nobody knows Junko is murdered. Miyano was actually interrogated by two officers, and one of them brought up this murder. Their conversation went around to murder. They thought it was possible that the boys were involved in a double murder that had taken place 9 days before Junko was kidnapped. It was the murder of a woman and her 7-year-old son. They thought these boys might either have information on who did it or may have taken part in it. So they were asking them about this murder. They didn't name any names or describe anything, right? Because they want to see if these boys will confess. Miyano thought that Ogura had confessed to them about Junko's murder, so he told the whole story. He then confessed because he was under the impression that the murder they were talking about was Junko's because Ogura had told them that. So he confessed everything. Ogura didn't say anything. So Lola's face. So he confessed everything. He said, yes, Junko was dead. And he told them where to find her body. Of course, the police at this point in time are shocked because this was not the murder they were talking about. And that murder was never solved either. The murder of the woman and her 7-year-old son is still unsolved to this day. So could they have been part of it? Maybe. Who knows? But anyway, regardless, at this point in time, they now know that Junko Furuta is dead. And they did go and recover her body. Now, some reports say that they recovered her body the next day. So it would be like January 30th. Some reports say that the body wasn't recovered until March 29th. I don't think that's the case, guys. I think they weren't able to properly ID her until the 29th. They would have had to get the concrete off her, etc., etc. And she was only ID'd through her fingerprints because she was so beaten so badly. She was unrecognizable. They were only able to do it through her fingerprints. So on April 1st of 1989, Joe Ogura was once again arrested. He didn't confess to anything, remember, guys? So they kind of let him out. And I don't think Miyano ratted anybody else out. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that, guys. At that point, I don't know. Anyway, regardless, he was arrested for a different gang rape. I don't know. He was arrested for a different gang rape that he had committed during that time period. And as such, it was then that police arrested him for Junko Furuta's murder. They then also arrested Minato Watanabe and Minato's brother. They just arrested him. They didn't charge him. Who was the one that had called them and definitely was in the house on occasion at least and knew what was going on. DNA was also found on Junko's body, and it led them to arresting other people for this crime, not her murder and torture for the rapes, because they were able to find semen and pubic hairs, and they were able to link Tetsuo Nakamura and Keiichi Ahara to the crime from this too. So they were also arrested. I think a few other people were too, guys, but this would only be for rape. Now, this is where it's going to get even more outrageous to you guys. Sorry about this, guys, because not only is it shocking, all the things that Junko went through, the ages of the people involved are also shocking. And the court outcomes will probably have you guys as outraged as I was. In Japan, the legal age of adulthood is 20. Okay, it's not 18. It is 20. I guess in 2015, they were able to amend it a little bit. So 18 is now the legal age a person can vote. But 20 is still the age of adulthood in Japan. If you are below the age of 20 years old, no matter what crime you've committed, no matter how serious it is, you have to be charged as a juvenile. I know. Sorry, guys. Even though they're 16, 17, and 18 years old, or were at the time of Junko's murder, they could not be charged as adults because the system does not work that way in Japan. Of course, this is really different from a lot of the other areas we've talked about, right? You guys know here in Canada, if you are under the age of 12, You can't be charged as an adult. Remember from JR and Jeremy Stanky. He could be charged, but JR was only 12 at the time she helped murder her parents and her brother. So as such, she couldn't be charged as an adult. According to our law, she was unable to form criminal intent, or basically it's criminal responsibility. She was unaware, complete. It makes me mad because, you know, most small children know it's wrong to kill. But at that point in time, she wasn't able to form criminal responsibility, let's just say. She wasn't mature enough to form it. So 13 and up is usually when we can start trying people as adults who are juveniles, guys. But it depends on, I think you already have to have a criminal record. And as far as I know, it has to be a very serious crime, like robbery involving weapons, murder, sexual assaults, probably assaults that would cause somebody's death too. It's got to be a very serious crime before that happens here in Canada. And you know from JR's case too, that 10 years is the maximum a person can get here in Canada in the juvenile system. Apparently, your brain can't comprehend or form that type of responsibility. So by contrast, most states in the US agree that 17 or 18 is the age of adulthood. It does range. Some of them say 16. However, and that's in order to form criminal responsibility. However, if you already have a criminal record and it's a serious enough crime, people 13 and younger can be tried as adults. It's up to the state involved. There's no broad-reaching age like here in Canada where it's always 12 and under. Every state can kind of enforce its own age, let's just say. And quote, all states have laws that allow or require juveniles to be tried as adults for more serious offenses regardless of age. Regardless, guys. So 10-year-olds can be charged as adults, etc., etc. And if you're charged as an adult in the state, there's really no limit to how many years you can get. If you're doing a life sentence, that means it's a life sentence, your whole life. This is based on the premise that these kids know right from wrong and have an adjudicate there that can explain the criminal system to them. I can't fathom a 10-year-old understanding the criminal system, but we know cases like this happen. And I think they're required to take some psychological testing and things of that nature too. Don't quote me. I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying to just give you like a small roundabout way. It's confusing. In Britain, the age can also be as young as 10, guys. Mary Bell, Thompson, and Venables. They were 10 and under, so they were charged as juveniles, and they had their identities changed once they were released. And we'll talk about Thompson and Venables another time, guys. But they were under the age of 10. So they weren't charged as adults. They were charged as juveniles, and they served their time and then were released. But over the age of 10, you can be. And I think it follows the same thing, like seriousness of the crime and prior criminal record, or prior associates. Now, remember, in England, a life sentence is a lot like here in Canada, where it's 25 years, unless you get the full life tariff, which we talked about in the West video. It's kind of like our dangerous offenders, so you can end up spending your whole life in prison. So in most societies, 12 or 13 seems to be the age that a child can be tried as an adult for a really serious crime. But let's be clear, guys, here, murder, basically the most serious crime, especially prolonged, torturous murder, is something that most 16, 17, and 18-year-old people would know is wrong. Maybe I'm just taking it for granted because in our society, like 16, 17, 18-year-olds are treated more as adults. Here, when you're 18, you are an adult. It just blows my mind that according to the system, and it's nothing to do with Japan, guys, this is just their system. They believe that children should be given a second chance, and they believe in the rehabilitation of children. We do too, but they definitely believe in the second chance. And it's just part of their law. It's a hard part of their law. They can't do anything about it unless they were to rewrite the laws, which hasn't happened yet. No matter what the nature of the crime, regardless, guys, no matter what the nature of the crime or the seriousness, if you're under the age of 20, you're charged as a juvenile. So because of their ages, right, there's a publication ban. We do it too. You know, that's why JR is known as JR here. She's a juvenile, so we can't release her name. And most people 17 years and younger, we will say we can't release their identity because they're a juvenile. Same as in Japan. Their IDs cannot be released. They were known as A, B, C, and D in the criminal proceedings. However, journalists were able to find out their names and publish them. They didn't really care. They said, quote, given the severity of the crime, the accused didn't deserve to have their right to anonymity upheld, end quote. So I got to say, good on the media, guys. Good for them. They actually published all the kids' names and their ages. These boys planned the kidnapping. They planned the tortures. They planned the rapes. They subjected Junco, who was also 17 and a child, according to law, to all these things. And they let other people use her, not to mention the other gang rapes and criminal activities they were taking part in. But they were not even charged with murder, guys. They were charged with committing bodily injury that resulted in death. Not murder. They weren't charged with kidnapping. They weren't charged with torture, sexual assault, indignity to a corpse. Nothing like that. They weren't charged with anything like that. Just that one single charge of, committing bodily injury that causes death. That's all they were charged with. Not one of those boys in the beginning showed remorse, guys. Not one of them helped Junco. Not one of them tried to bandage any of her wounds. Not one of them called police anonymously. Not one of them stood up for her. Nothing. Not one of them. So every single one of them was guilty. In July of 1990, Hiroshi Miyano, the ringleader who set the whole thing up, all because Junco refused to date him, and politely, I might add. She didn't turn him down, she didn't embarrass him, but whatever. Or she didn't make fun of him and embarrass him, but regardless, anyway. He was sentenced to 17 years. Of course, he appealed it, and I'm going to assume it's probably due to his age. He's like, oh, I'm too young, I can't do that time, or oh, this is unfair, I haven't had a fair trial. Whatever, he appealed it. Now, the judge from Tokyo's High Court saw through the boys. And I think based on the crimes and the fact that they were on the older end of the juvenile spectrum, he actually increased Miyano's sentence to 20 years. And 20 years, guys, is the second hardest sentence you can get in Japan. So life is the first, 20 years is the second. Legally, a juvenile can only be charged up to 15 years. 15 years is the max in Japan. It was actually overturned and changed to 20 years as a maximum punishment for a juvenile. But the person involved has to be between the ages of 12 and 20. If you're below the age of 12, I don't think anything happens. I'm not totally sure on that. There was a little convolutedness there, guys. So this was finally this judge finally saw these boys for the menace and the horrible people that they actually were. His parents were also ordered to pay the Furuta family 50 million yen, which was about $425,000 USD, guys. So it's roughly equivalent to that. In restitution, they were ordered to pay that. They never paid the money. Instead, they used it on their son. They stood by him, guys. They were not horrified at what he did and didn't seem to care. But anyway, they were angry at Junko, let's just say. So he was denied parole in 2004, and I believe he would have been released sometime in 2010, guys. That would have been 20 years, give or take. Might be a couple years before, as far as I know. So he was denied parole once, and then he was released on his actual date after he did his whole time. He immediately resumed his gang activities, and he changed his name to Hiroshi, Yokoyama, probably in order to hide his infamy, I guess, even though he's back in gang activities and illegal activities, but regardless anyway. He was actually rearrested in 2013 for fraud, but due to lack of evidence, he was let go. He was released, and as far as I know, he's still out of prison. So Shinji Minato was sentenced to a 4 to 6 year term. He appealed, and he got the same judge that Miyano got. So his sentence was actually increased to 5 to 9 years. If you guys do remember, he was actually the youngest of the group at the age of 16. But he appealed, and they also increased his sentences. The charges against his brother were later dropped, and his parents, incredibly enough, were never charged with anything. Not obstruction, not aiding and abetting, nothing. They just weren't. They were charged with nothing, so they got away with everything. He also later changed his name. A lot of these guys changed their name because of the notoriety involved. To Nobuharu. Sorry, guys. Minato. He kept his last name, I guess. And when he was released, he moved in with his mom. In 2018, he was arrested for attempted murder. He lured a 32-year-old man out to an area, beat him with a metal rod, and slashed his throat. Now, the man didn't die. He got 7 years for this assault. So he probably was released last year, guys. So much for rehabilitation and leniency due to age, because both of the Miyano and Minato both right back to criminality. Junko's parents, of course, were outraged at the light sentences that the boys received. So were most members of the Japanese society at this point in time, due to the severity of the crime. Because of this, the Furutas actually sued the Minato family in a civil lawsuit because her death and torture had taken place at one of their homes. They did actually win, but as far as I know, they never saw a cent from that settlement either. Joe Ogura was 17. He served 8 years in a juvenile detention center. I also want to mention that a lot of times young offenders are not sent to what we think of as juvenile hall. They're sent to a juvenile training program. It doesn't even make you think of a crime. It's a juvenile training school. Okay. So it doesn't even have criminality in it. It's like they're hiding that, or like, it might be because they believe in giving these kids a chance to better themselves. And they believe that they made mistakes because they were kids, but they can be rehabilitated and become normal members of society, functioning members of society. And at these training schools, they learn proper behavior. That's exactly what was written. And life skills that can help them get out of criminality and do better things with their life. This is in the hopes that the kids will learn from their mistakes, guys. But we've seen from the other two, they didn't learn anything. So let's check out Joe. He was released in 2004 and changed his last name to Kamisaku. He, like the other two, did not stray from criminality and immediately started bragging about what he had done to Junko, about his role in the crime. He was actually arrested shortly after his release on attempted murder, just like Minato. But anyway, he thought that a guy that he knew named Takatoshi Asano was trying to steal his girlfriend. So he found him one day, beat him, shoved him into a truck, drove him to a bar that his mother owned, and then proceeded to beat him mercilessly for the next 4 hours. For about 4 hours, guys, he beat this guy. During this time, he repeatedly told him he would kill him. He told him he knew, or he had killed someone before. And he also told him he knew how to get away with it. So he learned a lot. He got 7 years for the assault. Sorry. Miyato, I don't know how much time he got for the attempted murder on his victim. I think he may still be in jail. I'm not quite sure. But Minato would actually be out because he only got 7 years for this assault. And it has been reported that he actually decimated his father's savings account with partying, and that his parents were okay with it, because that money was supposed to be restitution for Junko's parents as well, and they never received that either. The only one that actually seems to have learned anything from his crimes was Yasuji Wantanabe. He was 17 at the time of the torture and murder of Junko. He originally received 3 to 4 years, but then was resentenced on appeal to 5 to 7 years. After he's been released, as far as I know, and as far as everything's been reported, he never picked up his criminal tendencies again. He's not been involved in anything criminal that we know of anyway. So it seems like he was able to learn. 1 out of 4, I guess, of the boys learned a lesson. So in my opinion, obviously, this has been a crap show, guys. But I do want to let you know that Junko's funeral was actually held April 2nd of 1989. Her future employer, remember, she had already set up a job after graduation. He actually gave her parents the uniform she would have worn for her job, and they buried it in her casket. And when her class graduated, her principal remembered Junko, and so did the kids. They must have had like a little memorial type thing there, and they presented her parents with Junko's diploma. The area that Junko's body was found in was also made into a park, guys. So in my opinion, obviously justice was not done in this case. I'm sure a lot of you are going to feel that way. But then that leads us to talk about juveniles in general, right? And that can be a sticky subject. These boys, to me, were 16, 17, and 18-year-olds. Now, I know in our society, that's considered almost adulthood or adulthood outright. I mean, when you're 18. By that time, most people know the difference between right and wrong, barring any mental health disorders or barring any special needs that prevent that. Most people know the difference between right and wrong, and most people know that you should never hurt a person or kill a person. So it seems very hard to me that these boys wouldn't have picked that up from somewhere. But anyway, you know, they were also involved in violent gang rapes and other criminal stuff. So, I mean, really, but anyway. They got off lightly due to their ages, and there are some reports that they may have gotten off lightly because the judges feared the Yakuza, or because there was Yakuza interference, but that's been unproven. I don't know, guys. They hid behind their ages. That's what they did to try to downplay the severity of the crime. They hid behind that, and they used that to get off as lightly as possible. Maybe the whole time they were raping her and torturing her and even killing her. Maybe they figured, oh, because we're young, we'll get off. It won't matter. In fact, that's why the Yakuza and a lot of gangs affiliate themselves with such young people, because it is believed that if the younger people get caught, they only have to serve juvenile time. Whereas if an adult was caught, the consequences would be greater. So in many cases, teens or kids that commit shocking crimes, guys, while still very young, are rehabilitated by the system, guys. It does work. It does. Leniency does work. A lot of the times, mistakes we make as kids, think of some of the mistakes you've made as kids. I don't think any of us have killed, but think of some of the mistakes you've made. The things we do as kids, we later learn from, and when we look back, we're horrified that we could have done something like that, or we can't believe we did something like that. It's maturity, right? The fact that you've reached some maturity, the fact that you're able to accept responsibility, things of that nature. A lot of the times, teens that do, and young kids that do commit crimes, even some of the more serious ones, are properly rehabilitated and are able to become normal members of society. As far as we know, JR hasn't gotten into any trouble. However, she has legally changed her name. I can't say for sure. But a good example of that in Canadian law would be Warren Glowatsky. We talked about him a little tiny bit when we talked about Donnie Club, just a little tiny bit. So he and Kelly Ellard were the two main people that killed Rena Burke. Of course, it was a group of them that lured her out and beat her up, but Warren and Kelly continued on with it. So he was charged with her murder. He did become rehabilitated in jail, specifically through sentencing circles and things of that nature. He did. He is actually a very nice, from what I've heard, well-spoken young man now. And he and Suman, which would be Rena's mother, she was a lovely lady, guys. She actually just died fairly recently, only within the past couple of years. She actually forgave him, and she spoke to him in prison a few times. I think she even wrote him letters. He was able to turn his life around. Another example would be Danny Trejo, you know, the actor from Machete, but he's been in a whole bunch of other stuff too. He was in a SpongeBob movie as well, I remember. He actually recently wrote an autobiography, but he was involved in a lot of criminality when he was young. He went to prison and he was able to turn his life around. Charles S. Dutton, he was, when he was younger, committed an attempted murder. And he was also able to be rehabilitated. On the lesser end of the spectrum, I guess you could say Tim Allen, right? With his drug charges in Kalamazoo. He was a little bit older at that point in time, but he learned from his mistakes. Even Snoop Dogg. He was at one point in time affiliated with the Crips, guys, remember? And he was up for attempted murder charges. He was a little bit older at this point in time. I think he was in his 20s, and I'm sure Suge Knight helped to get him off. But anyway, look at what he's done with his life. He's turned himself around. He still makes music. He has a friggin' cooking show with Martha Stewart, for the love of God. He's put out a cookbook. I love Snoop Dogg, so I have a whole bunch of his stuff. But he was able to turn his life around. So it does work. But there are certain cases where it won't. And three of these boys, at least, didn't seem to learn anything back about it. And it could have been due to their indoctrination into the Yakuza. It could have been because they were so loyal to the Yakuza. Maybe they even feared retribution from the Yakuza if they ratted out any of the members. I'm not sure. I mean, Miyano for sure just went right back into gangs right afterwards. So it could have been due to the indoctrination. And also that could have been coupled with their youth that made them just believe they were above everything. That's what they thought. They thought that because they were Yakuza, because they were part of this criminal organization, they were above the law and they could do whatever they felt like. They served relatively small sentences, guys. Very small sentences for a horrific, horrific crime. And when they reoffended later on, their sentences, again, were not very long. 7 years for assaulting somebody and almost killing them. It's a belief in the second chance. Now, I don't know if there was any, they were basically returned to the public the same as before. In fact, they might even have learned even more about criminality. Who knows? The juvenile training centers did not help them. I don't know if there's counseling programs or what type of program they follow in that or anything of that nature, guys. But if there were, it doesn't seem like 3 of the boys learned anything from it. In fact, these boys were older than many of the people in the Western in the Western Hemisphere. Yeah, in the Western Hemisphere, that are charged with serious crimes. Stephen Truscott was 14 years old when he was tried for murder, guys. 14. We tried him for murder. And he was found guilty. Of course, we'll get into that case at some point in time, but originally he was found guilty, guys. He was sentenced to be hung at 14 years old. Severity of the crime. But if he had done this in Japan, even though we know he didn't do it, but if that had happened in Japan, there would have never been a sentence like that involved because he's only 14. He's definitely a kid, can't form criminal intent, and his mind is basically at its dumbest. A lot of people say that, right? Because you're going through hormonal changes, but you're also learning maturity. I don't know, guys. We can't really judge the system because that's just the system. That's just how the system works in Japan. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people that could judge our system and the system in the States. Look at how many people we've put away that did nothing. So maybe the belief in the second chance has something to do with that too. So Junco, unfortunately, the story is not completely over, guys, because Junco was not even afforded peace in death. One of the boys' mothers, some reports say it was Miyano's mother, some reports say it was Joe Ogura's mother, actually vandalized Junco's grave. She said the reason why she did it was because that Junco had ruined her son's life. Junco. A girl who had goals, aspirations, kind, nice, beautiful, and had only said no to a date, had ruined her son's life. Her son wasn't tortured. Her son wasn't burned and had horrific things shoved into him and beaten to a pulp and fingers smashed, etc., etc. None of that happened to her son. He was the one that did that, but she blamed Junco. She was a firm believer of blaming the victim. It seems like all the parents that were involved with the boys, not the Furutas, but all the parents of the boys, it seems like they all held that in regard, that they saw their sons as above the law, that their sons didn't do anything wrong. It was almost like they believed that Junco deserved this. Now, I know that sons are highly prized in Asian cultures, so it could have been because of that. It could have been due to their fear for the Yakuza. Could have just been out of a twisted sense of loyalty because they loved their son so much, but regardless, they blamed the victims. And most of the parents that were supposed to pay restitution either gave it to their sons or let them party it away. They didn't do anything with it or just didn't pay it. Just give me a second, guys. I'm going to show you a picture. So this is basically based on the crimes of a kid who decided that he couldn't be told no, that everybody was supposed to do his bidding, that he was the best of the best, and he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. And really and truly, I know he got 20 years. I know that's like a longer end sentence, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. And I mean, if he was 38 when he got out, and 2013 fraud, right back to the gangs. He learned nothing. Probably more criminality in there. All she said was that she didn't want to go out on a date, and that was so embarrassing to him. He had to cook up this plan of revenge. And then his parents, allegedly, may have further desecrated her grave. So that's Junco right there. I hope you guys can see it. I don't know if I can pull up. Yeah. I can't tell you who's who honestly, guys, because they don't, even in the pictures that they show, they don't usually put like an identifier underneath of it. But you can see that 2 of the kids' faces are actually blacked out too, because they were so young. He carried this sense of entitlement into adulthood. If he didn't, he wouldn't have still gone on. It's very likely he's still a member of the Yakuza. Junko's case is actually known in Japan as the concrete encased high school girl, not Junko. So she doesn't even have that dignity offered to her. This girl was tortured, dehumanized, demoralized in so many ways in life during those 44 days. And then suffered even more in death because the people involved in her death got really light sentences. There was never any restitution to her parents, despite winning civil lawsuits, things of that nature. Her family continued to suffer because her grave was desecrated, and nobody seems to care. Not one of the main 3. I don't know about Watanabe himself. I don't know if he ever showed remorse for what he did. But not one of the other 3 ever showed remorse or ever acted like they cared. They took her life and it didn't seem to matter. Ah, well, just another day. You know what I mean? Now they were like, let's go off and live our own lives. In fact, if Miyano had never mistakenly confessed because he thought they were talking about Junko's murder, it's more than likely that she never would have been found and her parents would still be wondering where she was. So what do you guys think? What do you guys make of this case? Is this one of the worst ones that you've ever heard? What do you think of the reason why she was killed? Just revenge for saying no to a date. What do you think of the justice that occurred in this case? Was justice served in this case? What do you guys think? I don't think it was, but what do you guys, obviously, if 3 of the 4 didn't learn anything, what do you guys think of that? What do you guys think of the small sentences other than Miyano? Like 8 years, 5 to 9 years, 5 to 7 years, tiny, tiny sentences for torturing, raping, kidnapping, and murdering a person. And they weren't even charged with murder. What do you guys think about that? What do you make of it? What do you make of the difference in the criminal systems? What do you think about juvenile crimes anyway? I do feel that the majority of youths who commit crimes, even serious ones, with maturity and with your brain becoming smarter, let's just say, and with hindsight, people are able to understand what they did and how wrong it was, but it doesn't happen in every case, especially in cases where the person was already highly involved in criminality and already has an allegiance to a criminal enterprise. But what do you guys make of it? I guess in closing, what we can say is that Junko probably could have contributed a lot more to the world. She was beautiful, she was nice, she was goal-driven. She didn't party, she didn't drink. She was a kind of daughter everybody wanted. She probably could have done great things with her life, but instead she has to be remembered for this. So that's it for this week, guys. Next week will be our last Halloween one. I know. This was a lot, guys. This was a lot. Hopefully you will join me next week. I'm kind of going between 2 different cases because I know we have to leave at least 2 of them until December. But hopefully you guys will have a good week, and I will see you back here for the last Shocktober video. Bye for now, guys.